There we go. Okay, so as Caroline has already introduced me, I'll dive straight in, and I'm going to be talking about an example of applying the person-centered curriculum framework in a research program, and it's really to develop a new curriculum. So we don't have an existing curriculum that we're reviewing or analysing. This is about creating a new curriculum. It's a post-registration program for musculoskeletal physios. And as Caroline said, I'm based in Denmark. The project is around supporting physios to deliver person-centered care. And we use that terminology for a particular reason when we were speaking with the funders. And the funders are the Danish Physiotherapy Foundation. We made a commitment to those funders that we would develop a program that is free and scalable, which means it also needs to be facilitator free. And this context is really important when it comes to when I describe how we applied the curriculum framework. Because it was quite a big task that we set ourselves to develop this facilitator-free program, which was then going to be an e-learning format, we used design-based research methodology. Now, you might be familiar with that if you're someone who has been working a lot in education design. I'm not by any means an education expert, and this is my sort of first experience of developing a curriculum like this. The reason that we chose this methodology was because it's iterative in nature, and also has two purposes. One, to produce prototypes of the education solution, and also to create theory. I haven't gone into any, I'm not going to go into any more detail. This graphic provides a really simple overview of the process. The QR code links to a website where there are some more graphics which show a little bit more detail about the methodology. And I believe that we'll be sharing the slides on the website so you can access these things after today's webinar if you want to. So how did we and when did we use the person-centered curriculum framework? So the initial point that we used it was at this junction between phase 1 and phase 2. And then throughout the cycle, so this graphic represents one cycle, we've also used it at a couple of the places. Today, I'm going to focus on the first initial use of the curriculum framework, and then I will mention a little bit about how we are and continue to use it throughout the research program. So design-based research is a problem-solving approach. And so in phase 1, we problematized with the steering group members and clinical practice advisors. We problematized the process of learning to deliver person-centered care, and we prioritized which problems we wanted to solve and address through this curriculum. And so we chose 3 problems, and then we had to work out, well, how do we come up with a curriculum that addresses these problems? And this is luckily where I had learned about the person-centered curriculum framework and decided to apply that in the curriculum design process. As Sean's already mentioned, the person-centered curriculum framework is underpinned by philosophical dimensions, and then also the 7 S's as part of the adapted McKinsey methodology. So we chose to focus on the underpinning philosophical dimensions and methodological principles of designing a curriculum to really help us start with a great foundation in this curriculum design process. At the initial stage, we needed to map the findings from phase 1. So that's the problems that I've already talked about. We also had some data sets around facilitative characteristics and content, and we needed to map those to the philosophical principles of the curriculum framework to see what does this framework mean to us in our context. We then came up with 4 curriculum design objectives. And it was important to us to put some words around these design objectives which link to the underpinning philosophical dimensions, but that actually means something to us in our context. I'm going to briefly go through each of the 4 curriculum design objectives. So the first one is in line with the curriculum being transformative. So it's still very strong in our design objective, and but we also wanted to include and acknowledge these key problems that we needed to address. The second is linked with co-construction. And so we want to design a curriculum that was adaptive to learners and given opportunities for co-construction within the curriculum. The third one is pretty much exactly the same as the curriculum framework principle. It's about being relational at multiple levels. So we wanted a curriculum where there was connectivity with self, with others, and connectivity with context. And then the fourth one, we wanted to make sure that the curriculum was grounded in the reality of physiotherapy practice. So those 4 design objectives really helped us to make sure that the curriculum was going to be person-centered from the starting point. We then needed to map those dimensions further within the boundaries of the PERCS e-learning program. So the fact that it needed to be facilitator free and was going to be an e-learning experience. We then we explored and expanded within these dimensions about different learning theories and pedagogies that were relevant to this context. And as a result of all of that, we developed key features of the curriculum, which relate to learning activities and the learning environment. I'm going to come back to these key features in a few minutes. But first of all, I just wanted to sort of summarize where we are within the research process. So if we go back to our model, you can see that we problematized in phase 1. We then introduced the curriculum framework and applying that through a mapping process, linking the findings from our research activities. We created a preliminary curriculum. Now, the reason at this stage it's preliminary is because we want to have a co-design process. We recruited 9 physios to engage with the preliminary curriculum, and there was lots of choice and option for those physios, so they also then co-constructed the curriculum. And then from that point, we were able to use the curriculum framework again to make sure that as we develop the curriculum, it remains person-centered. I'll just quickly finish off the story of the research project within this first cycle, and then I'll highlight where we've also used the curriculum framework. So the next stage, once we had the co-constructed curriculum, we'd already started to reflect and evaluate, and then we moved more into an evaluation phase. We then, and we haven't done this yet, we're going to do a co-design workshop with the physios who engage with the preliminary curriculum. And so by the end of this year, we'll have version 1 of the PERCS e-learning curriculum. And then the plan is to evaluate that program using the Danish language program that comes out of this process. So we're also then using the curriculum framework to facilitate the evaluation process and to guide the co-design process. So bringing you back to the curriculum framework, and you remember that we had initially focused on the underlying philosophical principles. And so now we're shifting towards using the 7 S's. But a little bit like how we had to see how the philosophical dimensions applied in our context, the 7 S's also require some adaptation, some further adaptation to what's already been done from the McKinsey methodology to a person-centered curriculum. We now need to look at those and how they apply to the context of the PERCS e-learning. And I'm going to use some of the 7 S's just to describe and elaborate a little bit more detail about the program. So we can talk already about strategy. We have our unique selling point, and we talk about the co-design and iterative design approach to developing this curriculum. the purpose, which matches with the purpose of a curriculum framework that Sean's just shared with us. It's about supporting physios to become person-centered practitioners and to contribute to advancing person-centered healthcare. And then you can see that the key features of the curriculum are it's person-centered, self-directed, reflection-based, and values-based. We can also talk about structure. And when we think about structure for the PERCS e-learning program, we're thinking about the boundaries that apply. So the fact that it's an e-learning program and it's facilitator free. And then I want to highlight here that one key thing that we had to consider in the structure of this program was how to support the self-directed learning experience for the physiotherapist, because it is facilitator free. And so by keeping that in mind as we were designing our activities, we can come back to our descriptions of structure and make sure that, that we're remaining in line with the curriculum framework. For systems, of course, this still includes the learning activities and assessments. And you'll see some of the key features coming through here, the fact that it's values-based, that it's reflective, it's experiential, that the learning environment is co-created, and that really supports transformation. And then because we are using a design-based research approach, and I mentioned earlier that part of that was to develop theory, we also have design principles that we can, as we go through the iteration design process, we can test these design principles, and that helps us to maintain a quality within the education program, within the curriculum. The other 4 remaining domains of the 7 S's, we need to do a bit more work to adapt the definitions to the PERCS facilitator-free e-learning context. So as you can see that a lot of the definitions that are used within the person-centered curriculum framework refer to the organization and the people responsible for the education provision. So we can think about that in relation to the project team, the steering group, and the people who are involved in the co-design process. But we can also then think about it in relation to the level at which the learners engage with the learning resources, so through communication, content, resources, and activity. And then we're going to continue working on this to guide future iterations of developing the e-learning program. And so to come back to the overall picture, and just to summarize, we've applied the framework to guide the creation of a new, and it was initially a preliminary person-centered curriculum in the context of a facilitator-free e-learning post-qualification program that's a standalone program. We have and we will continue to apply the framework to guide reflection and evaluation of the curriculum so that we can create an improved curriculum through the iteration process. So I added an extra star in this graphic because for my lessons learned, probably one of the main lessons that I've learned is if I had my time again, I would have applied the curriculum framework at the very start of the project. And it's particularly in relation to shared values and skills. And I think if we'd done that, this would have certainly strengthened the project team and the steering group and facilitated their contributions to the design process. Luckily, because we're doing iterative design, hopefully if I get some funding to continue the program, I will have my time again, and we will be able to think about how to particularly look at the shared values and the skills as we set up perhaps a new steering group and a new project group. So it's a bit of a whistle-stop tour. And I just wanted to say thank you for your time, but also thank you to the creators and the authors for their providing the curriculum framework. It was a great help within my project. I'm going to stop there. That was my timer. So I hope that that's all been very clear, and look forward to hearing some discussions.
Thank you, Diane. That was great, and it was great to see the application and how you've gone about that. We do have time for a question, if anybody would like to ask Diane a question while she's here. Dan, you're still sharing.
Oh, let me see if I can
A
stop.
lovely landscape there. There we go. Does anybody have a question to pose to Diane? If not, oh, Brendan, you're going to ask a question.
I was holding back until I saw if others came. So, fantastic work, Dan. It's really amazing to see where you've got to with it. It's really great to see the application and the systematic approach to implementation and design, which is really lovely. I guess I was interested in the 4 philosophical principles, because I think that's fantastic that you started with those and worked with them, but was just interested in the processes you use in the co-design to kind of get consensus on what they looked like in the framework or in your curriculum, and how much commonality, how much sharing, how much agreement there was around that. And yeah, did you have to really dig deep to get people to come on board with those?
It was, on reflection, the process perhaps wasn't as deep as it could have been. And it was certainly a lesson learned for future iterations. So what we did was we took the research activities that were in phase 1 and all the findings from that, and then it was more of a sort of logical kind of mapping process, rather than sort of digging into what people's beliefs and values were. We were quite, what's the word, like objective about it. So, and that was to make sure that it made sense. And then we did like a prioritize and a consensus discussion, which is like a virtual nominal group technique. And so we used that, but that was more about prioritizing the problems rather than actually working on the philosophical dimensions. What I see happening in the future is to revisit those dimensions once this version 1 of the curriculum is there, and to revisit those dimensions and to maybe dig a little bit deeper with that. And I think that's probably because we didn't think about them at the very start of the project, if that makes sense. I think if we'd thought about the curriculum framework at the very start of the project, we would have taken a different approach.
Yeah, no, I get you. Yep. No, I think it's an interesting point about, where we bring theory and frameworks in design, and the problem of people starting a design process without having thought through theory first, and frameworks first, which is essentially what you're getting at, because you kind of miss that moment in a way. So a good lesson to learn, though, but it's great.
Brilliant.
There's also, so can I have a follow-up if it's okay? Just that it's also then the realities of doing the research, and me as a kind of a lower person in the research hierarchy, not having much input as to who was going to be in the steering group and who was going to be in the project team. So that's also a challenge when it comes to starting these projects.
Yeah.
Fantastic. Thank you, Diane, and Brendan, thank you for the question. I'd now like to hand over to Lorraine Barry. Lorraine is here in Edinburgh, not physically beside me, but in the same city. Lorraine is also a physiotherapist of great experience, 22 years clinical experience, and until recently, she was a team lead of physiotherapists and out of our outpatient neurological service. And Lorraine is currently an associate lecturer at Napier University in Edinburgh on the pre-registration masters in physiotherapy. Lorraine is also studying a part-time professional doctorate at Edinburgh Napier and evaluating person-centered physiotherapy practice in the context of Huntington's disease, using a mixed methods approach. And Lorraine is going to share how she has applied the person-centered curriculum framework in their programme. So thank you, Lorraine. Are you there?
Yes.
You
yes.
are there.
Hello, everyone. And thank you very much for that nice introduction, Caroline. Hello to everyone. And I'd like to take the opportunity for this opportunity to explore the person-centered curriculum with you and describe the ways in which we feel, or I believe, that we are working to embed the principles of the framework within the master's programme at Edinburgh Napier University. So I'll just share my screen. Yeah, I think that's good. So I'm at Edinburgh Napier University, and as I said, we're in the master's, pre-reg master's. So those that apply for our course have had degrees before. And it is a 2-year intense master's course. So just from my perspective, it was my clinical practice, my own values and beliefs mean that person-centered practice care is really important. Person-centered physiotherapy practice is something that I am passionate about. So my current role, what I wanted to do with this opportunity is to see how those key principles and those values and beliefs that I believe are fundamental could connect and influence within the context of the person-centered curriculum framework. And to be honest, when this was brought to my attention, it was the first time that I had seen the curriculum framework. I'm very familiar with the person-centered practice framework, but through preparing for today, I could see definitely the influence and the overlap between the two frameworks. So from my perspective, as a member of the team providing master's education, it is important for me that we have a shared language, that we define and understand what person-centered practice means. To ultimately, we want to develop practitioners that have a person-centered perspective, and that we create those cultures. But for me, the fundamental thing is about that language, that understanding, so that we're able to foster, through that definition, helpful relationships, both with staff, with our stakeholders, with our students, and others significant to them as they go through their journey, and underpinning and agreeing from the outset what the values are, and how they align with both respect for persons, the individual, their right to that self-determination, that mutual respect and understanding. So from the get-go, that is something that we discuss, we set the boundaries, and we collaborate with the students to understand what are their values and beliefs. And so for me, it was about how then does this connect to the person-centered curricular framework. I looked specifically at the methodology and at the 7 key S's, and then I will talk you through how I believe our master's course is mapped to those key domains, shall we say, that are fundamental to the framework. As you'll see, there is definitely a disparity from my perspective, my understanding of where I feel we are aligning to these, and where there are gaps, and where I'm seeking opportunities to influence at different parts of the person-centered practice curriculum. So the first one that is mentioned in many of the literature, but particularly the one that was shared with us, was strategy. And although I believe that the key shared values should be the beginning, middle, and end, and that's what influences and keeps the kind of gel and the understanding of the actual curriculum framework. I think there's that thread throughout that influences and is mentioned in the other 6. But just to start with strategy, I felt that this was one of the hardest ones. So different to Diane, I felt that I was mapping from the bottom up, shall we say. So we're not designing a curriculum, but I'm trying to see how we are aligning to the key principles. So currently, I would say, we have our strategies that's led from a strategic point of view with the Edinburgh Napier University and our own health and social care frameworks, and the wider strategy, the requirements that comes from that level, that macro level. We also have our Health and Care Professionals Council, which guides and kind of influences our kind of our key standards, and so we need to map and include them in the language that they potentially use. So my question later on is around how can we influence at that macro level to ensure that they are using the language and that we are all in agreement that this is the way to provide an experience, both teaching and care. So it is about the language, fundamental to embedding those philosophical principles of person-centered within the curriculum. And that understanding, as I said, from the very start for students in the context of Edinburgh Napier, of that what is person-centeredness and what is personhood. And then secondly, structure. So we are physiotherapists, we are, educating the next generation of physiotherapists, and naturally we have that curiosity within us, but embedding that culture of curiosity, trying to explore opportunities in safe spaces, so that they can be those critical friends. So that openness, that culture of freedom to share, freedom to raise. So those academic practices that we are instilling, and those the behaviors that we are demonstrating, to allow the students to develop within that structure, for want of a better word. So so I would say we want that to be the norm as we move forward, as we develop within the curriculum. And by creating these safe spaces, we're creating that culture of openness and transparency. It is linking to our service, to our shared values, and we are understanding what are the needs of both our students, our staff, and our service users. Okay, so for me, these were the two challenges when I was trying to map. The third one was probably the easiest one to see concrete examples of where we have aligned our system. So what do we have in place currently that aligns with the framework? So for me, within the systems, one of the part of the definition is that teaching, learning, and assessment evaluation. So one of the key examples that we can offer is that self-reflection that is key to our profession. It's part of the HCPC standards, but that ability to reflect on their learning environment, so to improve learning environment, the self-reflection of their learning opportunities, and just that being part and parcel. So we encourage self-reflection both from a professional point of view, but also within modules and offering that feedback. And that happens both within the curriculum and on practice education in the clinical setting. Secondly, we've got that student engagement, that strong want and desire to involve students as equal partners. So engagement and getting feedback regularly on module content, teaching materials, and the way in which we deliver our education. We actively encourage this practice, and we also actively include that that closing of the loop for that student engagement and feedback from their learning. So you said, we did. Then collaborative learning, we really encourage that peer-to-peer interaction through group projects. Within that group project, we are encouraging fostering social skills and gaining that diverse perspective to, to keep an open mind, ask those questions, that curiosity, but also what that collaborative learning allows is for people to get, as I said, different perspectives, to ensure that people's opinion is valued, and that everybody has a place at the table. So another example that we would offer with regards to the collaborative learning is as part of one of our advanced modules, we do a digital resource, which is feeding back into clinical practice. So clinical practice educators would highlight the need for a digital resource, the collaborative working with both the clinical site and the students, working with kind of real life issues or challenges or different ways of delivering care. So that link between practice education, service users and students. So there's a meaningful engagement with all parties. So that's really important for me, where there is a link between clinical practice, not just of going out on placement, but giving something back to the field. That interdisciplinary, it's also collaborative learning, but interdisciplinary learning, where there is opportunities to learn with both our OT and our social work colleagues. And in the future, we'll do more with our nursing colleagues. So that understanding of roles, role taking, different perspectives. So certainly the curriculum that we deliver has that strong collaborative learning aspect. Also, one of the strongest examples that align with the curriculum framework is the facilitated learning, and in this case is the simulations. So these are the opportunity for students to have experiential learning, that real world-like opportunity to develop their practice and their knowledge in the situation that they will be going out to in practice. So for us, that is one of our strongest learning opportunities that we can kind of embed within our curriculum, and we're developing that as the years go on. So different opportunities, and as I said, more in the future, aligning that with our nursing colleagues as well. In addition, we offer small group reflections to allow, so done with their personal tutor, to allow the students to kind of have that smaller, kind of less intimidating, but still an opportunity to share in a safe space, kind of what changes would be important, what would make a difference, what other considerations do we need to make for their particular learning styles, etc. When we consider the multisensory approaches, so making sure that we've considered the ways in which our learners prefer to take on board some of our teaching styles. So, getting that feedback, and one of the examples is that video that we would do, assessment videos, and have them up on our Moodle page for learning at a later date. So allows that kind of them to embed the learning, and just understanding that students learn in many different ways, and having those opportunities there for them, but also using their feedback to adapt our teaching styles. And then again, the importance of student voice and voices. What we believe is that students, where possible, should have the choice over the groups that they work in rather than being assigned groups, and that they can also choose their dissertation topics. They've got much more control over their learning, to make sure that they get the most out of the time that they have, a very condensed 2 years, but they are in control as much as possible within the structure of our professional body, but they are choosing. They've got more choice over what that looks like, a bit more flexibility. And then with regards to their voice, their student voice being heard, we have our student representatives that support both on a local level, but they also sit at different boards, certainly within some of the health boards, to be involved at that more strategic level, and valuing their opinion at different opportunities.
If I may interrupt, just
yes,
time if it's possible to wrap up.
No problem. Yep. So as I said, the rest. So we would say that the systems was definitely the easiest to map. I started by saying our shared values are definitely what gels all of this together, and that's why we feel that we're moving in the direction of this person-centered curriculum framework. As you can tell, the passion, that collective leadership is there, but there's still definitely there's still the need for ensuring that staff and the skills are there to help support us all as a team, and that we're using stakeholders' opinions to guide, but also to direct what's important to them. And so, being involved with our service users, getting them their perspective, and our practice educators. So what is it that they want to see within our curriculum as well? Skills and staff. The presentation will be shared, but for me, this was certainly a really good exercise, a very proud evaluation of what we are doing to move in the direction of a person-centered curriculum. We are striving from a person-centered perspective to be delivering education in this way. And the ultimate aim for us is engaging in the principles of the framework to ensure that the people that come through our education are delivering care at the highest standard, but in a person-centered way. So thank you very much for listening and for being able to share what I've found in our curriculum. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Lorraine. Really appreciate your time, and I'm sure you'll agree that we've had two great examples of how the person-centered curriculum framework has been applied, and both Diane and Lorraine have adapted it to their context, but also have approached it in a different way. For Diane, wasn't quite at the start, but certainly a systematic design methodology to create the curriculum. And Lorraine has used it as more of an evaluator of a current curriculum. So what we'd like to do now, and I'm sorry there's no time to ask Lorraine a question, but hopefully you can take your questions into your groups. So hopefully if all goes well, I have created groups. But these are the two questions that we would like you to share, if that to chat about, if that's okay. So, what opportunities and concerns would you have, or have you experienced in applying the person-centered curriculum framework? And what are the actions people have used to influence current structures and strategy to be more aligned to a person-centered curriculum? And that second question is really the key question that Lorraine's been grappling with, and would really love to hear what your thoughts are. I'll put these in the chat as well, but you might want to take a quick picture of those questions into your group. Let me do that. I'll put the questions up now. Let me put you into a group. We've got about 15 minutes, but what we would ask is if somebody, there will be a facilitator in the group, but doesn't have to be the facilitator, maybe just ends the group work with a conclusion that they're happy to share in the big group. If that's okay. Breakout rooms.
How long are we in the group for, Paola?
15 minutes. Okay. And I think I've managed, so we'll see you in 15 minutes. Philippa, you don't seem to be going. Oh, no, don't want you to put you there. How do I? Hello, sorry, I didn't get to you. How's Mum? Mhm. Hello and welcome back. I must start with my apologies to Group 1. I didn't know how to get into Group 1. Shima is normally with us and is a wizard at all these things, but unfortunately she couldn't be with us today. So I am really sorry. And I'm so disappointed I didn't get to be part of the chat. However, thank you for the clap, Philippa. So I hope you had really good discussion, and I wondered if you would like to share one of the groups would like to share their conclusions.
Can I go first? Can I go first?
Sean,
Well,
yeah.
not only grey hair, but my grey matter inside this wonderful head is not functioning at its best at the moment. I'd like to get it out there before I forget it all. So basically, we had a good input from everyone that was in the room, and I'm talking about Paul Slater and Lorraine was in with us, Philippa was there, Rhoda was there, and Susie from New South Wales. And to conduce it all, there were like two main themes, and the themes were around translation and embeddedness of embedding. So translating and embedding were two key messages that were coming through. And what we mean by that, this wonderful concept of person-centeredness. So person-centeredness as an overarching concept needs to be translated. And it needs to infiltrate through everything that you're doing when you're working with a curriculum and you want to have a person-centered approach to developing person-centered practitioners for the future. And that needs shared understanding of what you mean by that at all levels, from a leadership level, from the curriculum developers who are developing curricula, and from those delivering the curriculum as well. So there needs to be a shared understanding, shared values as well. It helps if you also use the ideas of inclusivity and diversity, because then you're actually giving new ways of looking at honouring personhood, and that you are living the philosophy when you're actually translating that concept into everyday curriculum design, delivery, and evaluation. And evaluation was also coming on to looking as well. Don't forget that we also assess learners. So it can be quite tricky, and that can be quite a challenge, is to look at what does person-centered mean when you're assessing as well. The embeddingness, there was ideas around make sure you're being explicit when you're working, so you can actually showcase what you mean by person-centeredness. Talk about the experiences and create opportunities to experience person-centeredness. And the other one was around dare to experiment as well, and find out what works and what doesn't work. And in light of the second question as well, if you're doing all that as part of everyday practice, you're actually influencing, and hopefully with key figures, you will be influencing at a larger level, at the meso level and at the macro level. So that's when you're going to be able to not only put a word, if I look at my own experience as well, the word is in all the policies, but it also needs to be lived as well. Then we come back into the translating thing. So I think that's one of the consolidated messages. And I'm looking at the crew. Just nod your head and make sure that I've done you justice. Okay, thanks.
That was very fulsome. Thank you very much, and some key insights there, which are really helpful. Thank you, Sean. Group 1 or Group 2? So that was Brendan or Diane's group.
We agreed that I would report back for Group 2.
Perfect. Thank you, Donna.
Yeah, and we had practitioners and educators and academics in our group. And so we had a discussion around how it feels to be at university and be prepared to become a person-centered practitioner, and your experiences of whether the curriculum prepares you for that well, or whether you're receiving a kind of person-centered education, and also about the experiences of embedding person-centeredness into curriculum and academic life, and the spaces that can be created at the university for experiencing person-centeredness as a student to help you kind of develop that framework or way of looking at the world, or way of looking at yourself and looking at practice. And the kind of, if there were to condense that down, we talked a lot about the importance of making things explicit. So not just so making it explicit what the values are and where they're coming from and how they fit into the framework, and how you can use the framework of person-centered practice, and also how those values are influencing the way you want to build your curriculum and interact with each other. And the importance of we didn't have it necessarily, we weren't talking necessarily about translation, but about clarity, being clear about what it is you're trying to achieve, and clear about which framework you're talking about and which terms you're using. Can the other people in the group add to that if there's something I missed?
I think you explained it well, what we have talked the last 15 minutes. And I think the most important thing, well, for me, it is that we all agree that it's important to have a person-centered culture within the university. It's between colleagues, between teachers, because it's difficult to focus only on the care process, you being person-centered during care. If you are not person-centered within the university, the academic life, that's one big that we all agreed. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, Claudia. Yeah.
Thank you, Donna, and thank you, Claudia. Really important point you raised there about culture. Thank you. And Brendan, are you feeding back from your group?
Well, I can do. I wasn't nominated, but I guess our conversation was very focused, and maybe that was partly influenced, which was really good, by Bram, who's kind of new in this space at Fontes as well, kind of taking on, in a way, the project management of a new curriculum. So great opportunity to really kind of think some of this through, but also kind of really bring to the sharp focus the challenges of getting started, getting something established, getting people on board, and then doing something that can be sustained. So it was a really discussion, I think, around those components of how do you kind of manage this complexity, but at the same time develop, which Caroline was very, very clearly talking about and was really helpful, simple principles that people can hook onto. And we are, all in favor of that, of how do we kind of synthesize some of these complex frameworks into some really workable principles that people can hook onto and use. But the challenge of that is that those principles can be very helpful, but if they're not then understood, if they're not facilitated, if they're not helped to become part of a dialogue and a discourse and a continuous process of change and engagement, they can become just a stick by which people are beaten up with, without everybody understanding the kind of the complexity that lies behind them. So it raised that whole issue of, do you start from a complex framework such as the one we've developed, or do you start from a kind of a simple set of principles and then use the framework to help kind of explode them so that people can start to have different strategies for understanding the complexity that might lie behind them? Because if not, then they just become, as I said, this kind of stick that if you're not doing that practice, if you're not doing that principle, then you're not doing person-centeredness. So it becomes this kind of very black and white, blunt instrument. And so there is a danger in that curricula have got to navigate, both in terms of the actual content itself, but also in terms of the culture in which it's embedded, which everybody else has talked about. And then, yeah, I mean, that was the majority of our conversation, I think, about trying to navigate that difficult and complex territory that I think everyone who is either starting from scratch or trying to amend or adapt a curriculum in whatever way that is faces, and we're all in it in various ways. So I think there's a lot of shared learning can come from how you balance those two things.
That's great, Brendan. Thank you so much. So
And if anybody wants to add to that, if I totally misrepresented it, then please do.
Somebody else want to add anything?
I can add that, and your main tip was read the book.
Read the book.
Thank you.
Well, certainly the book will help you navigate complexity. I think the way that we have written it, it is really helpful. With lots of activities and lots of explanations and what have you, because that's what's coming out really clearly for me, is the importance of clarity and the importance of shared understanding and translation, getting people on board. And Diane, said that in her presentation, didn't she, that she hadn't quite done that right at the beginning, and that was the key learning for her too. But the importance of shared values and of course the supporting culture.
May I add one thing to that?
Of course you can, Donna.
What we also mentioned in our group, and which is relevant for this, I think, is that the work is ongoing and never done. So every time you think every time you make progress with creating shared understandings and clarity and making it explicit and making agreements to work together, as soon as something changes, you've got to keep doing that all the time. It's a continuous, ongoing process. So don't feel discouraged if you think, didn't we do this last year? Didn't we do this 4 years ago? It's an ongoing process of getting to know who we are and how we are working together in these ways.
Really important point, that dynamic nature of the curriculum, but that systematic way of approaching it. Great to like climate change, Sean's saying. Thank you so much for all the conversation, and can I please thank Sean and Diane and Lorraine for taking time out to share their work with us. And I hope you've really enjoyed it. We will put the slides, and I've tried to capture the key learning as well onto the website. And just before you go, and I know that we've just slightly gone over time, the next webinar is the 21st of November, and it's collaborating for partnerships, and it's our colleagues in Fontes, Tietska and Sean who are going to be presenting and exploring how the construction of case narratives and academia education practice collaborations can foster care partnering in technology supported healthcare. So that's one not to be missed on the 21st of November. We'll try and get the timings right. Apologies for colleagues down under. And before that, I'm right in saying, Brendan, that we've got the AGM on the 21st of October, and I'm imagining, Webb, that you'll be sending out invites for everybody.
Yep, that'll be coming out soon.
Perfect. So with all of that, all that remains is for me to wish you a very good rest of your day or evening. And look forward to seeing you in November when Christoph will facilitate the webinar. So bye now.
Thanks so much. Bye.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Bye.